leadership. And so I will start to share my screen. As in times past, we will have some breakout sessions, and we will also have some discussions within the course of our lecture this morning as well. And so, but if you have questions at the end or even during the lecture, please do not hesitate to ask your question, and I'll do my best to try to answer it. I will go ahead and share my screen and my PowerPoint, and we can begin this lecture. Let me see here, slideshow from the beginning. Again, we're looking at the 4 pillars of effective leadership this morning. This is kind of a brief outline of where I'll be, what I'll be addressing for the class. We're going to have a quick review of leadership definitions and the 3 key relationships of a leader. We had this discussion probably in early July. Then I'm going to discuss Robert Greenleaf's servant leadership principles. And then I'll be discussing my research on Robert Greenleaf's research on his leadership principles as I have redesigned, or as I attempt to make the presentation, and then we'll have some closing comments. So let's do first. We'll do some of the quick review. Some of this will be very familiar to you, and so again, I'm wanting this just because it will help to set up. As we talk about the concept of leadership, I want to make sure that we're each on the same page, being from different countries. I know we have 7 different countries that are here. And so I gave you different definitions. By Northouse, this definition is that leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. Again, the emphasis in each of these definitions is the use of the word influence. That a synonym for leadership is influence. How do you influence another person? Or leadership really is basically influencing people to go to an objective. And so the definition, leadership occurs anytime one attempts to influence the behavior of an individual or of a group. And so leadership's not only an individual matter, it's also a group, has group dynamics to it. Sanders in 1967 said leadership is influence, the ability of one person to influence another person. One man can lead others only to the extent that he can influence them. And then I gave you my definition: accepting a calling upon your life as you live a life of personal character, influencing others toward a worthy goal. And I wanted to focus right here a second, and I don't know if I've given you this quote that I designed a few months ago, and that is, effective leaders influence others to accomplish a shared goal, but it's through significant relationships. Again, the influence is through significant relationships. For you and I to be a person that can influence another individual, we have to be able to have a relationship with them. And that relationship often will determine how much influence the person will allow us to have upon them. Now, we have 3 relationships of every leader that we discussed again about a month ago. The 3 relationships of a leader is a leader and their mentor, or their relationship with God. Since I'm a Christian theist, that's my worldview. I include God as a relationship with my leader, a leader and self, you having to lead yourself. And then the other was a leader and others. Now, we broke this down into this perspective where a leader and your mentor, your leader relates where you often get your calling in life. Leader and self is your personal character, your ability to lead who you are. And then the leader and others is your cause. It's where are you taking people? What is that worthy goal that you're leading someone after? It's the who, it's the what, and it's the why of leadership. And I showed you this diagram. And I want to just talk about this just for just 10 seconds or 15 seconds, because it puts those 3 perspectives of your calling, your character, and your cause together. Your calling, your character, and your cause. Again, your calling is your leader and your leader and your mentor or your God. Your character, leading yourself, and then your cause, where you're going. All 3 of these relate to your purpose in life, because your calling relates to your purpose, why you have a sense of why you want to get up. Your character, do you have that personal fulfillment to be able to carry out and to have the discipline and to have the confidence to lead yourself, but then your cause, which direction you're heading in. I had the chance to read, because I'm a member of your Facebook class, your PowerPoints on your purpose. And so I greatly appreciated reading your comments, because if a person does not understand their purpose, does not understand their calling and their character and their cause, they will not be as effective of a leader as they really need to be, or as they really could be in life. And so those are all of that was just a matter of review from our conversation that we had in the early part of July. But what I want to do today is address the how of leadership. How do we lead, and specifically, how do we lead as a servant leader? I believe the most effective style of leadership is servant leadership. Now, let me explain a little bit about servant. I'm going to explain a lot about servant leadership. This is a book called Servant Leadership by Robert Greenleaf. It's Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness. My university here in Kentucky, Western Kentucky University, has asked if I would design an entire course on servant leadership. So I'm teaching this semester starting in 2 weeks on Monday night on August the 24th. It'll be my first set of lectures. I'll be teaching for the next 15 weeks, or for 15 weeks, 3 hours a week, on the topic of servant leadership. We'll be using this book as a textbook. There'll be some other books I'll be using. And so I'm going to be putting all this into I guess you could say, over 30 hours of content on the topic of servant leadership. What I'm giving you today is a very, very brief summary of a broad perspective of servant leadership. Now, servant leadership, we will explain, is a servant leader this will help us to understand some definitions and some comprehension, and then we'll have some discussion on it as well. But again, Robert Greenleaf's Center of Servant Leadership. Actually, this book was written in 1977. So this book was written over 40 years ago. But since that time, servant leadership has become very popular, especially in the United States. Says the servant leader is a servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve and to serve first. The difference in servant leadership and other types of leadership is the leader, he or she wants to lift up, or wants the people that he or she are leading, he wants their followers to be able to accomplish all that they can. And they're thinking about serving them, not necessarily about controlling or only leading them. And that's a big difference in the aspect of servant leadership. So even that next paragraph says a person is that person is sharply different from one who is a leader first. The servant leader thinks, I want to serve first, and because I want to serve, I need to lead. Where often a leader is a person who tries to lead out of coercion or manipulation, or out of control. It's even in his title of his book, it says A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness. See, at the very core of servant leadership is the concept of power. And power is defined as the ability to influence, or the potential to influence another person. And so a servant leader says, I want to serve first, and because I want to serve first, I actually give the follower the power to make decisions and to go in a direction, and they're not trying to control or to manipulate that person. Servant leadership, though, can often appear to be a paradox, because is it service? Influence, is it service or is it leading? And it's really can be confusing for many people to understand what servant leadership is. Even in the last 15 to 20 years, the concept has been clarified more and more, and people are able to understand in a greater sense the comprehension of being a servant. See, servant leadership focuses on the leadership from the point of view of the leader and his or her behaviors. It's really a behavior modification or a behavior-driven perspective, going back to that diagram of calling, character, and cause, a person's character is extremely important when it comes to being a servant leader. The person's ethics, a person's morality, a person's perspective of life is at the very center of being a servant leader, because the servant leader puts other people first. And to put another person first, you have to be very strong in yourself to be able to share that power or share that responsibility. This is a diagram that has been interpreted many different ways and is shown throughout. Actually, we saw this diagram and copied this off of a student there in Tokyo who did a summary of this lecture on servant leadership and made up this diagram. He or she was a student at AGU there in Tokyo. The diagram on the left, you see the leaders at the top. He is the one, and everybody is serving him. It's to make him look good, or it's to make him or her to be the person that's responsible. But a servant leader is the one who's lifting out other people, and he is actually serving them. And so really it's an inversion of that triangle of servant. Not that there's not people that the servant works together, but this really is the servant leader. He or she is the one that is enabling other people to be successful and enabling other people to accomplish their objectives. A good professor is a servant leader, because if the professor is not thinking about just his content, but he's thinking about the student and the student learning something and being able to take what they learn and to move in direction. So there's servant leadership in education, there's servant leadership in business, there's servant leadership in religion, or aspects of the person's relationship with God. There's servant leadership in government. It's a very broad perspective that we are going to interact on and to discuss. It advocates building a consensus. This will kind of help to understand some of the historical basis and some of the understanding of it. It advocates building a consensus in groups rather than trying to be coercive, and it has to be the leader's perspective. On this previous diagram, you see, if it's here, it's always the leader is the one who's in charge. And the leader on the left there is the one, and it's his opinions matter most. Well, no, if you're a servant leader, you have to gain consensus of all these people, or the people that you're trying to lead, and you're wanting them to understand and wanting them to help make the decisions that's true of their life. It was began by the author, read a book called Journey to the East. It's a fascinating little book that I've actually ordered it, so it's a copy from years and years ago. But it's about when they found out there were travelers that were traveling on this journey, and they realized that the true leader on this journey was the servant. It was the person that was making sure they had enough food on the trip, the person that was making sure that they knew the direction of the journey. It was the person who made sure that the fire had been started and that the needs of the people had left, because in the little novel, the servant leaves, and then all of a sudden the journey almost disintegrates because they don't have anyone to take care of those basic needs. And so the servant is the one who ends up being the leader. The leaders in servant leadership have a social responsibility for the have-nots, or those who don't have a lot of responsibility or don't have a lot of power in their own life, because leaders shift their authority to those who are being led. It's different than those other styles of leadership. It has a different perspective. It's concerned with putting followers first and the outcomes that are likely to emerge because of that. A servant leader works best when leaders are altruistic. Altruistic means that you're thinking about the needs of other people before you think of your own needs. It's a very selfless type of a leader. We do not have a lot of altruistic leaders nowadays. One of the most common person from years ago was Mother Teresa, was known as a very altruistic person that always thinking about other people. And it is important for followers to be receptive to this style of leadership, because some people don't want to be served. Some people just want to be led. They want to be told, do this and act this way and go here. And so depending on the culture will determine on whether or not the servant leader leadership principles really work. Again, the strengths of servant leadership. It makes altruism the central component of the leadership process. It kind of provides a counterintuitive approach to leaders because leaders share their control, but it's not a panacea, meaning this: it's not a easy solution for all the problems that are taking place. And you have to be able to understand how to adapt servant leadership for the culture that you're actually looking at. I have a question down here, and I asked the question, will it work in Japan? Will servant leadership work in Japan? Let me tell you a story. A good friend of mine is the president of a major plant here in Kentucky called Logan Aluminum. They make a very large percentage of aluminum cans, like Coke cans or Pepsi cans or Dr. Pepper or other drink containers in America. They take the aluminum alloy and they melt it down, and then they make it into sheets of aluminum so people can make cans out of aluminum. They have a very strict policy when you walk into this plant. The plant has hundreds of workers. And when you walk into the plant, you have to walk through a security area, and you have to take off all of your jewelry. You have to take off your watches. You have to take off your rings, because they don't want your jewelry to get in the way of the machinery and then that you get hurt. Well, the plant manager, the plant president, is a friend of mine. And he tells me the story. Again, it's United Aluminum Company of Japan. This company is actually owned by Japanese. They're here in Kentucky. It's called Logan Aluminum. He walked into the plant about 6 months ago. Actually, this is maybe about 9 months ago at this point. He walked into the plant, and as he walked in, he is the plant president. He is in charge of the entire plant. Everybody knows who he is, and everybody knows his name. He has great power. He has great authority in this plant, but he's also a servant leader. He's a very fascinating man named Ken Purdue, a great man. He walked into the plant, or walked into the security, and there was a young man sitting at a desk as you walk into the security. This young man was probably maybe in his first year of working at this plant, had no responsibility except for making sure when people walked into the plant that they took their watch off, and that they took their jewelry off. Well, my friend, the plant president, the plant manager, walks past him and waves and keeps on walking. All of a sudden, the man stops and says, "Excuse me, sir," the man at the security desk, "Excuse me, sir, you have your watch on. Would you please take your watch off?" Well, my friend, the plant manager, the plant president, said, "Okay, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me." So he grabbed his watch and he took it off and put it in his locker. I forgot where he actually put it down. Well, he and I were discussing that situation, and he asked the question. He said, "You know, if that would have been done in Japan, due to the honor and the respect culture of Japan, because if you're the supervisor, or if you're the professor, or if you're the president, or if you're the leader of the company, everybody bows down to you. And often, how far you bow shows a great degree of respect for your leaders." And he asked the question to me. He said, "Thomas, I know you're going to be lecturing in Japan in January." He said, I'm curious, will servant leadership work in Japan with a very high degree of respect and honor culture that is there? I found his question to be very fascinating, for sure, because it helps me to realize, well, that I wonder, will it work in that country? Because there's some criticisms to servant leadership. And some of the criticism is that it may seem whimsical, or it really doesn't really seem like leadership. And sometimes we can't get a consensus of what it actually means. There's a prescriptive overtone that suggests that good leaders put others first, and that can conflict with principles of leadership about directing and concern for production. Well, I have a question I want you to discuss. I want to have Obari Sensei put us into small groups, and I want you to discuss this picture. Now, I know in our class today, we have people from Japan, of course, Japanese students that are here. We have students from Vietnam, students from Saudi Arabia, from France, from Bosnia, from India, and from China. Will the servant leadership work in your country? Now, before you answer this question, I want to open it up for, is there any questions that I need to clarify about servant leadership? I know I've been lecturing for, for 15 minutes or so, and so I have given you a lot of information about servant leadership. But from what you know, does servant leadership work, or do you have questions you want to ask me first before Obari Sensei puts us into discussions? And so I will stop sharing a second. Do you have anybody have a question you'd like to ask me before I break you into groups? Yes, Shamir, good to see you.
Hello. So I had a question about exerting influence as a servant leader. Under what circumstances do you think this technique would work, given the kind of people that you should have around you, and what their skills are, or what their level of skill is or development is?
Yes, that's a very good question, because leadership often involves the skill level of your followers. Okay, and so a good leader has to diagnose their followers to say, okay, are they competent and are they confident in their leadership? And so part of a servant leadership is developing competence and developing confidence in their followers. And so servant leadership is not saying that a leader does not train their followers. He or she has to train their followers first, but he is looking out for their interest, and part of their interest is being competent and being confident. And so now, for instance, if you're leading a person and you've already trained them in a skill, or you've already trained them, I'll give you an example. If you're going to be a surgeon, you want your teacher to make sure you know what to operate on in the body, right? You don't just say, "What do you want to do?" You can do it. No. As the leader teacher of the surgeon, you have to say, "This is the appendix. This is the kidney," and this is the skill that you have to learn before you let them operate on a cadaver, or even before you have them operate on a person. But a good leader will think that's a way to serve them. You serve your followers by training them well, so that you can release them to do the job. Does that help answer your question, Samir?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're saying that motivation is the basic prerequisite to being a servant leader.
Yes, motivation both for the leader and for the follower.
Okay.
If the follower if the follower only wants to be told what to do, there's a distinction between a person being a leader and being a laborer. Some people are just laborers, and they just want to be told, here's the shovel, go dig a hole, and here's where you dig the hole. Other people are motivated to be to accomplish something. To give you a scenario, there is 4 men. Actually 3 men laying brick, laying brick and concrete to build a big structure. And the first person walked up to the man laying brick, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he's saying, "I am laying brick." And I said, "Good, okay." Then he walked up to somebody else. They're at the same building. He said, walked up and guy's laying brick, and he said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I am building a wall." The guy says, "Okay, he's building a wall." The next person walked up to another person laying brick, and he said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a building." And then the last person, they walked up to him, and he said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I am building a cathedral." Now, they were all doing the same task, but it was their motivation. It was their interest and their desire of, I'm accomplishing something. So if you're a laborer and you just want to lay a brick, then your motivation isn't very significant. If you're a leader and you want to build a cathedral, or you take pride in what you're doing, it really changes how the servant leader works, and also the person that you're leading. That's a great question.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yes. Does anybody else have a question you'd like to ask before I break you into group about your culture?
Professor Weakley, could you write down the question?
Yes, I'll go back to that question one more time.
Yeah, on the chat,
Okay, yeah, I will put it in the chat. Let me see if I can find it where my chat is. And the question is, do you think that servant leadership will work in your country? Country. And the reason I ask it is because depending on your culture, for instance, in India with the caste system, it may be a little bit more difficult for servant leadership to work when there's a broader caste system. In Japan, maybe it's a little bit more difficult because of the honor system that's there. And so I don't understand your culture. You know your culture better than I do. And so I want you to discuss, Obari Sensei will break you into groups, discuss, do you think servant leadership can be effective in your country? We can only, SL stands for servant leadership, yes. And we'll just have maybe a discussion for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and we'll continue that conversation. So Obari Sensei, would you please place us into small groups?
New factories, because in some way for the old generation there is still the level of respect between we should like always pay the respect to the elderly people. So that's why I think for the modern generation it's more acceptable. Who would like to go next?
if they're presenting a dessert, it has to be perfect. And so if it's not perfect, they'll throw it away, at the different restaurants in Tokyo. And so I think your perspective of not allowing failure, because if you're not comfortable with failure, you will not take a chance to lead. You will not take a chance, and sometimes that affects your motivation. And as Kento, as you said, it involves, sometimes can relate to being passive as well. So that is, that's very helpful to understand those aspects. Do you believe the aspect of honor impacts servant leadership? Like, if you were lower in the respect, would the person be willing to confront their leader if their leader was doing something wrong in Japan? What do you think?
Oh, I think that servant leadership would work in France because are devoted to the company or organization. Oh, a bit like you said for Japan. Thank you. Oh.
Effective.
But it also, like Bruce, really good to kind of transfer that kind of leadership into companies also today, because that like earlier in software development there was the waterfall method, which like was like staged, but right now agile development is the thing. And agile development is in the sense like a type of servant leadership where you do not have a concrete leader, or actually you do, but like you do not feel it, like you work in a group and everything is done quickly and agile. So that is also like sort of indicator that this approach is like better in some situation than like having a hard leader like to command everything.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, so yeah, in such agile style case, members should be spontaneous by that. So servant leadership will work very well because this leadership style is enhance the spontaneous attitude of each member.
Yeah, and also this spontaneous and bringing new ideas, it's kind of hindered if you have somebody that tells you, okay, you need to do this, right? Yeah. But of course there comes a stage, if it doesn't work, there comes a stage where somebody needs to step in and say, okay, like we need to there's a crunch time, so we need to like do this, right? So I guess it's a balance between those two things, definitely.
My major is machine learning.
Okay. All right. Okay. That was interesting. Yes. And are each of you doing your PhD work then?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you're both all PhD students. That is wonderful. Very smart. Y'all are brilliant. And so congratulations. Obari Sensei, we are through.
Yeah,
We've had our discussion.
Have you had enough discussion?
Yes, we have. We've had plenty
then
of
I will
discussion.
take you all to the main session. Yeah.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. So good to talk to you again, each of you. before I show you more PowerPoints about servant leadership and we have more discussion, in my group, everyone was from Japan. And so I was able to get an understanding from the Japanese culture more about servant leadership. I'm curious, tell me about you. In your group, do you think servant leadership would work in Vietnam? So if you're from Vietnam, talk to me a second. Does it work? Would servant leadership work in Vietnam?
Hey,
Hello.
so hi. So I think I really like the idea of servant leadership, and I would love for it to be able to work in Vietnam. Although in practice, there are in government organizations, I don't see any example of that in Vietnam. In private companies, though, there are like really popular type of leader is in Vietnam. So because it
Yes.
feel like it motivates people more. On the other hand, the government just want to abuse their power. So
Okay.
yeah.
Right. Yes. I'll be very honest. You do not see many governments with servant leaders.
Yeah.
That's not a real common thing in the government. You see it much more. You see it much more often in private companies. Or that's kind of, so that's very good insight from Vietnam. Thank you for your
Thank
comments. You see, how about from in Saudi? I'm trying to find. Yes, Badar.
What I was trying to explain to my group is like, I think the servant leadership could be seen by the old generation as disrespectful or improper. But somehow in the young generations, I can see it is more acceptable, and it's more to show that this is a freedom of success and this is a way to be a good leader. If we look to some private companies or some young ministers, we can see the concept of the servant leader. But I think for the old generation, it's hard to change their belief about it because it can be seen as a disrespect.
Yes, very insightful. That's probably true in other countries as well, but if you're used to being led by very strong authoritative leadership, servant leadership may very well, you're right, I believe it is viewed as disrespectful. But you're the generation of new leaders. Each of you here in this class, you're going to be the leaders in your country, and so maybe you can become a more servant leader and bring that into your country. So thank you, Badar, for that very good comment. How about India?
Yes. So I think in India, it really depends on the person and the group that you're working with. So we have a very diverse country, and each person has very different upbringings and the way they are taught to look at things. So there are people who have been educated and at the top of things and with like good amount of money and influence for like many tens of generations, and there are people who have just learned how to read and write like one generation or two generations ago. So people who typically come from such backgrounds tend to despise being told what to do. So I think and they are able to understand reason behind judgment pretty well. So if you are able to show them why you are doing something and your motivation behind it, and why they should understand your point of view and put in their motivation into the path that you want to show, this servant leadership model can work very well. And on the other hand, there are other people who don't really look at work as something that they have to do on a daily basis. So most of these are not very educated. Most of these have sort of grown up to think of the state as something that just gives you things. Like, I mean, it sort of comes from this whole model of the king being at the top of everything, and the king serving everybody and taking care of everybody. And the whole notion of this democratic way of doing things where each person is responsible for their own surroundings is very new to them. So for these people, I think this servant leadership model would not work very well, and it's best if you tell them what to do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that insight. Yes, like you said, India is very broad, has a very diverse culture, so it has a lot of different perspectives in it for sure. How about someone from France, Jordalet? Do you think it works in France?
I'm not so sure. I think at the same time that it could work due to the French culture and because people are devoted to the institution, so they want to do the best. So I think it could work for this. But at the same time, I think that in France, the organization, the hierarchical organization is really vertical. There is one person at the top and a lot of person below, and you have to respect the person above. So for this reason, I'm not sure it could work. I think it's really, I'm not so sure, because for both reasons, it could work or could not work. I do not have really example. I think, for example, in the education system, servant leadership work, but in the company, I'm not so sure, but I do not have example with me, so I cannot answer clearly the question.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. How about from Bosnia?
Yes, so of course, it depends on the background. So it's easier to implement that type of structure and leadership with people that come from higher education background, for example, in our case, like software development companies and everything, than it is, for example, in companies that do physical work. But I think on average, just judging and knowing like my people, because I come from Bosnia and this is like in the Balkans, right? So we are the not so developed part of Europe. That type of leadership structure, I think, would not work just because people have naturally the tendency, if they are not left unchecked, so if they are kind of free and the leader is not so highly pronounced and you do not know who the actual leader is, people have the tendency to start behaving like they are the leader and they are in charge and they know what to do. So this is really dangerous in the Balkans, especially because a lot of people have that tendency. So I think that servant leadership wouldn't really go well in the Balkans just because of the nature of the people.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if the nature, and that's why I talked about how servant leadership, your character is very important. And if you're wanting to control or wanting to take over, and there's too many people wanting to take over, you're going to have anarchy. You know, it's going to be crazy there in the culture. So very, very insightful. Good. How about someone from China? What do you think? How do you think it would go in China? Anyone from China want to speak? Hi. Yes. Okay.
I want to take the example of a president of a country. Just my view of point. I don't think the kind of servant leadership is suitable for China. No, because China is a developing country and we are in the road of developing. So the leadership need to be strong and excellent enough to lead the Chinese people to develop our country. But I think with the development of China, we actually need the type of servant leadership. A good leadership should consider his citizens at first. He should be excellent enough. At the same time, he needs to meet the needs of people. And I think both of the two kinds of leadership are necessary. But actually, I think how to make a good balance within the two types of leadership is important.
Yes, very insightful. You know, you mentioned your government, And again, I think it's very difficult for most governments to think about servant leadership. That's not most of a person who rises that quickly or is a president of a country or the prime minister of a country, they're not really thinking very much. They're thinking about power often. They're thinking about control. They're ambitious leaders. They want to lead, but they may not be thinking about how do I serve or how do we develop as much as we should. So thank you for sharing that there. Obari Sensei has put a country there in the chat, or not a country, but a company, became a new company after its practice of servant leadership, Shiseido.
Shiseido. It's a very famous cosmetics company, like
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so thank you for doing that.
May I ask, I don't know, after they listen to your special lecture about servant leadership, do they prefer to work at the company where the servant leadership works well? Okay, I will just ask them. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Could you choose 1, 2, 3? Yes, no, or neutral? Okay. You all.
Again, do you prefer to work at a company where SL works well? Yes, no, or neutral? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Yes. 70% yes and 30% neutral. That's interesting. Thank you for taking that poll. That's very fascinating. Yes.
I'd like to, know about the people who voted for neutral. Why do you think, they feel that it's sort of neutral? Any feedback or comments for those people, for those who voted for neutral? Why did you vote for that? Any comments?
Again, anyone comment, please? If you said neutral, why you said neutral?
I said neutral.
Okay.
Yeah, why? Yeah, could you just make some comments? Yeah.
I think that both organizations have advantages and drawbacks. And so I think that in some, maybe servant leadership would be more interesting, but I think that the classical organization can have some advantages in some cases. So I think that at the moment, I do not have any real preference, and I think I can try both just to see.
I see.
So I feel neutral for the moment.
Good. Yeah. Who else? No comments? Okay, that's all right. Professor Weakley, you can keep going.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you. Let's continue on. I will reshare the screen and continue the PowerPoint for this discussion there. Let me see. Okay. Let me go back one more time. Sorry about that. Yeah, the one thing I wanted to show, these next 3 or 4 slides, servant leadership has been, as I mentioned, has been studied now for about 40 years. And there are different professors or different researchers who have taken and they have tried to explain what servant leadership means. And one of the most popular is a man by the name of Dr. Spears. And he gave the 10 characteristics of servant leadership. I want to just show these to you and just give you the points, but then I want to share my own personal research. But the first, again, Spears said that the 10 characteristics are a servant leader needs to be a person who listens, because you're listening to the viewpoints of their followers. You need to have empathy, or being willing to stand in the shoes of the other person, the person that you're leading. Excuse me. There's a sense of healing, and that's helping followers become whole, and how they heal themselves. So it's more than just the job, but very holistic. There's a sense of awareness. They understand that oneself and the impact they have upon others. That's very important when it comes to being self-aware. A servant leader needs to be a person who is able, he or she needs to know how they come across. If they come across too strong, or if they have that sense of self-awareness that's there, that they're persuasive or have persuasion, that their conceptualization or the aspect of having a vision for the company, that they have foresight that also relates to vision, stewardship, and then a commitment to growth of the people and building community. You will get a copy of this. Obari Sensei, I've sent him a copy of this entire PowerPoint. So these 10 points are there, but those 10, those characteristics are what Spear said. What I wanted to do for the rest of our time is I want to share my 4 pillars of servant leadership. I've called this the 4 pillars of effective leadership, or the 4 pillars of servant leadership. And in many ways, I've taken those 10 things that Spears has. These aren't the exact things, but I've kind of conceptualized them into a mental picture of a building that has 4 pillars that supports the entire concept. And they're the 4 pillars that I describe as effective leaders, or 4 pillars of the servant leader: the pillar of conviction, the pillar of companionship, the pillar of courage, and the pillar of compassion. And so let me explain each of these. First of all, if you're going to be a servant leader, you need to be a person of conviction. Now, for some of us may think, wait a second, isn't that counterintuitive for a servant leader? But you need to understand, a leader has to have foresight. The leader has to be thinking about where they are going and where the company is going. And so servant leadership is not the lack of conviction. It's having conviction. It's having a sense of, I know what is right, or I know what is wrong, and I know the direction that I need to go in. Abraham Lincoln says, he probably was the most famous president of all time in America. He said, always bear in mind that your own personal or your own resolution to succeed is more important than any other. That the leader, the person, has to have that personal sense of conviction in their life to move forward. You have to be willing to take that risk. Now, a person's convictions develop over time. They start with opinions. Then your opinions become beliefs. Beliefs are studied opinions. And then those beliefs become convictions. A conviction is a tested belief, or it's something that I really believe that this is true because it becomes tested. Let me give you an example. And I have this thing called a watch battery. I have in my hand here a watch. This is called a Timex triathlon watch, and it's, it has a timer on it. It has alarms on it. It's just a basic kind of a watch. About 10 years ago, with this watch right here, the battery went dead. And so, it has one of those small batteries the size of a coin. And I took it back to the store I purchased it in, which was Walmart. And I gave the battery to them. I said, can you change my battery for me? And the lady said, yes, I'd be glad to change your battery for you. And so she took off the back of the watch band. And then on the back of the watch, there are 4 very, 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 very small screws. They're about the size of a pinhead. And you need a Phillips screwdriver to open those up. And it's a very small screwdriver. Well, she took off the screws, and then she took the battery apart, or took the watch apart, put the battery back in, put the back on it. And when she started putting the screws into the back of the watch, she dropped one of the screws. And again, these screws are very, very small. Well, she bends down and starts to find the screw. And I asked her, I said, what are you doing? And she said, well, I dropped the screw. And I thought, oh, I will help you find it. So I got down on my knees, and we're both in this room with this carpet. And I asked the question. I said, well, ma'am, excuse me, if you don't find the screw, what are you going to do? And then she said, well, I have to give you a new watch. And I thought, wow, that's great. And in my heart, I thought, oh, don't find the screw. You know, I would like to have a new watch. And as soon as I said that, I found the screw. My finger touched the screw. And she kept looking. I didn't say anything. She kept looking. And then she finally raised up after just a couple more seconds. And she said, well, sir, I can't find the screw. I guess I'll give you a new watch. Well, at that moment, I had that screw in my fingers. And I put my hand in my pocket. And then I thought to myself, Thomas, you believe in telling the truth. That's your belief. Will you tell her the truth and give her the screw, or will you be quiet and get a new watch? Well, guess what I did? I gave her the screw because I believe in telling the truth. I believe that's important to tell the truth. And the watch would have been about $40. And I thought, is my integrity, is my conviction worth $40, or is it more important than that? So I gave the lady the screw back, and she said, oh, great. And she put the watch back on. See, a leader, a servant leader has to have convictions. You have to be a person who knows what you believe, because you're leading people into a direction. You're leading people to do something that needs to be done. And if you don't have convictions, then you will not know what direction your company or your organization may go in. Well, I ask a question here real quick. What areas of life does a leader need to have convictions? Well, give me some feedback. Tell me. Unmute yourself, and then this, or maybe put it in the chat. Right in the chat. And let me stop sharing a second. And write in the chat. Just make 1 minute and write in what areas of life or what issues of life do we need to have convictions in. So take a minute and write in what areas of life do leaders need to have convictions on. Write it in your chat. Work ethic, good. That you have a good work ethic. Somebody else. In politics, okay, yes. Keep going, somebody else. Right means of making money, okay? Having the right kind of integrity when you're making money. Yeah, Badar, I appreciate that. It sounds impossible in politics. I can understand, Badar, that you would say that. Sometimes politics makes no sense, doesn't it? Somebody else, what areas of conviction would you need to have convictions in? Disaster recovery, oh, wonderful. Well, especially in the midst of the pandemic. In the midst of when you had the tsunami that took place in Japan. I think that it's most important to have convictions that will bring you closer to your company's goals, but you also need to have the balance with the ethics of treating your employees right too. That's exactly right, because you want to make sure your company and the people have shared goals, that they have the same conviction. If they don't have the same conviction, then would you want to work for that company? Thank you, Horace. Research ethics. Oh, yes. The ethics of AI, you know, or all those different things that take place. Yes. Urgent situations, countermeasures for COVID-19, a big earthquake. Yes. How you respond. When do you tell people about COVID? When you tell people about the earthquake, or I guess everybody knows when the earthquake happens because you feel it, of course, but education sector and medicine, yes. See, it's interesting. You are leaders both now, and you will be leaders in your country. What are going to be your convictions? What are going to be your ethics? And that is the thing. Again, servant leadership is driven by our ethics. is how we treat people, how we treat others in our organization and in our company as well. Great, thank you for writing those in. I will now go back to my screen and I'll share the next point with you. So again, the first pillar that I've discussed is the pillar of convictions. It's you need to know what you believe, and it's not just an opinion, but a conviction is a tested belief that, yes, I will not allow this to happen ethically or in research or in politics or in organizations, whatever your areas of convictions are. Thank you. The next pillar of leadership, of servant leadership, I believe, is a pillar of companionship. The pillar of companionship. King Solomon of Israel said about almost 3,000 years ago, he said, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them fails, one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another person to lift him up. Furthermore, if 2 lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And if one can overpower him who is alone, 2 can resist him. Then he says, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. Actually, when I do at weddings, and often I will read this quote at a wedding because the importance of 2 people together, and 2 is better than 1. They keep each other warm. They increase their labor. More things happen. And a good servant leader is always thinking about his or her companions. There's an old Chinese quote says, a single arrow is easily broken, but not 10 in a bundle. Gordon MacDonald wrote a book a number of years ago that I read that talk about 5 types of companions. A VRP is a very resourceful person. A VIP is a very important person. A VTP is a very teachable person, and a VNP is very nice, and a VDP is a very draining person. Let me explain what they are a second. The VRP is a very resourceful person. That's the person who is a mentor to you that helps to resource or to give resources for your leadership. They help you. They're usually older than you are, or at least like an older brother or someone, and they help to mentor you in life. When I was doing my doctoral work years ago, I found this continuum on mentoring. And there are 3 broad categories of mentoring. There's an intensive mentor who's like a discipler or a spiritual guide or like a coach. It's the person who is with you almost every week that is helping you, that is really important. This often takes place when a person is younger. Then there's an occasional mentor, and that's the person who's like a sponsor, or maybe a teacher or a professor. It's a person that may just occasionally, maybe once a month or once every 6 months or once every 2 or 3 years, they occasionally mentor you in life. And then there's a passive mentor. Passive mentor is a person who you never meet, but you read their book, or they're a historical figure in life, and you think about this person, maybe they're from 1,000 years ago or from 200 years ago, and they're passive mentors that are in life. Intensive mentors, occasional mentors, and passive mentors. The older you get, it's harder to have intensive mentors, but you really do need to find mentors in your life. And that's my next question is, who is your mentor? I want you to take 30 seconds, and I want you to think through and write on your piece of paper. You don't have to write it in the chat, but I want you just to think in your mind, who is the person that is a mentor for you? Do you have someone older than you are that you're looking toward to help be one of your mentors? I want to give you, actually, instead of 30 seconds, I'll give you 15 seconds to think about it, to write that person's name down, or at least in your mind to think about it. Who is your mentor? And do you have one? Okay. I encourage you, for the rest of your life, you need to have a mentor. My mentor actually just died about 1.5 years ago. He was 97 years old, and he's a man who wrote many, many books. And he was a professor. He was a president of the university and he became a mentor to me in many, many ways. I want to mention this to you. You have a professor that cares dearly for you, Obari Sensei. Although you may not have, you have not been able to sit with him in a class, you have by Zoom. I'm sure he would love to be a mentor to you in any way that he could. If you ever want to contact me, do not hesitate. I've had the privilege to be in your class these 4 times. I'm in Kentucky, many miles away. But if I can be a help to you in any way, please do not hesitate to contact me, to email me, or to FaceTime book me, or to become my friend. So you need to have a mentor. The next type of companion that you need is a VIP, and that's a very important person, and that's what he describes. And that's more like a friend. It's a person who's not older than you that you're looking to for advice, to resource you, but it's a person who's coming alongside of you. He or she is the person that is your friend, and you can talk to them about anything in life. There's a man here in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where I live. He's actually just moved, but we had breakfast together every Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock for 30 years. Every Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 a.m., we would go to a restaurant and we would have breakfast together. And if I was in town and he was in town, we would meet together. And we did that for almost 30 years until he moved. Now we talk on the phone. You need to have a friend in your life that is a companion that's yours, that you can talk to about anything. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. I want you to write down, who is your friend? Who is that person that you can talk to and interact and really help, that will talk to you about anything? Who is that friend? And notice some of you have wrote down even your mentor in the chat. Your lab fellow there in the lab. Wonderful. Who is your friend? Do you have someone? We all need a mentor. We all need a friend. And the last one we have there, the last companion, is the VTP. It's the very teachable person. Okay, the VRP is the resourceful person. That's the person that is resourcing you. That's the person who's helping you in life, in mentoring you. The VIP is very important. That's the person who's like your friend, who's going through life with you. But the VTP is the very teachable person. That's the person that you're leading. My mentor used to say to me, he said, if you call yourself a leader and no one is following, all you're doing is taking a walk. You get that? If you call yourself a leader and nobody is following behind you, you're just taking a walk. Who are you mentoring? Who are you trying to influence in life? See, we need a person that's influencing us. We need someone that's our friend, that's going through life with us. And we also need a person that we can influence as well, and to be their servant leader. So who are you mentoring? I'll give you 10 seconds. Who are the people that you're influencing in life? Do you have someone? I think that all of us need to have that person that we're influencing as well. Well, I wanted to highlight those. That's the second C in the 4 pillars. The first one is conviction, that you need to be a person of conviction. Second one is of companionship. You need to have companions in your life, people that help you become a more effective leader as a servant. The next one is the aspect of courage. It's to be a person of courage. Now, in your courage, it's not just personal courage, it's also organizational courage. It's being willing to make those hard decisions for your organization. See, when you're a servant leader, it's not just that you're doing what everybody else wants to do. See, you're going in a direction. You're leading the company or you're leading the organization toward a direction, and you're enabling people to be effective in that organization. But you have to have the courage. You have to have the courage to have hard conversations. You have to have the courage personally to say yes and to say no. You have to have the courage in your organization to say we're going in this direction and we're not going in this direction because of the ethics of your group. Christopher Columbus said, you can never cross the ocean until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. I like that. You can never cross the ocean until you have courage to lose sight of the shore in life. One of the greatest leaders of the Bible, Moses, and his mentee, Joshua, said this at least 8 times. They said, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or tremble at the sight of you, for the Lord your God is with you. I love that phrase. Be strong and courageous in life. Our followers need strong and courageous leaders. Not mean, not harsh, but strong and courageous leaders is what is needed. And courage is very important. Courage is similar to conviction, but conviction is the mental capacity, but the courage is the willingness to follow through with that mental capacity and the willingness to say, yes, I will do this, or I will not do this. So you've got conviction, companionship, courage, and then you have the aspect, the last one is the aspect of compassion. You must be a person of compassion, or the person who cares for other people. And that's the unique thing about servant leadership that I believe brings to the table. It's that you care more about your people than you do about necessarily about the product that you're trying to produce. Saul of Tarsus in ancient Rome said this. He says, put on a heart of compassion and kindness, humility and gentleness and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. And beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. He said that over 2,000 years ago. Saul of Tarsus said that in ancient Rome. Put on a heart of compassion. The apostle Matthew, a follower of Jesus Christ, said, and seeing the multitudes, Jesus felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, or basically they were like sheep without a leader. And there's so many people in our country and in our world that are like that. They're like sheep just wandering around, and they need a servant leader to lead them, or like a shepherd to guide them, but to guide them with compassion. Douglas MacArthur, a great military leader in America, said this. It says, a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. I think that's a wonderful quote. He has confidence to stand alone. That would also have that sense of conviction, courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not set out to be a leader, but becomes one by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent. This is at the very core of servant leadership, because one of the very first slides I showed you was that a servant leader's first desire is to serve, and then they become a leader. And that's what this takes place as well. They want to serve, and then they want to become a leader. Now, the question I want to ask you is, what is the foundation to your leadership? Let me look at the diagram. Again, you have servant leadership here at the top. You have the 4 pillars of servant leadership. But the question is, what do these pillars rest upon? Because the pillars don't rest upon sand. The pillars have to stand upon something to make them strong. Well, I'm going to go through a series of possibilities for that foundation. The first one is, sometimes it's the organization or the group. Sometimes maybe you have a very good organization, or you have a very good group, and the organization can become the foundation. But what I have found, though, is organizations are made by people. And so it's who's controlling the organization, who's making the policies, who's making the opinions, who's making the rules of the organization. But for some people, their foundation is the organization. Sometimes it's like the university, or like maybe the president of the university, or the university is the one, and that's where these pillars rest upon. But it's the organization or group. For some people, their foundation is themselves. They think, yes, I am such a good leader, or yes, I have strong convictions, and I have all confidence, and I'm very capable. But I have found that each of us know ourselves. And the hardest person to lead is often ourselves. And so if we are our own foundation, we know how weak we are. We know how frail we are. We know, you know your secrets that nobody else knows about. I know my secrets that nobody else knows about. I know my brokenness. I know my frailties, my mistakes that take place. But for some people, their foundation is themselves. For others, it's their mentor. They think, yes, I have got the best mentor in all of my country, or I have got the best mentor in my university. But your mentor is also broken. Your mentor also has problems. You know, I have had 5 to 10 very significant mentors in my life. I showed those pictures of you to you back the last time we met, I believe. And in those mentors, all of my mentors made mistakes. All of my mentors were not, none of them were perfect. And so if your mentor is your foundation, what happens when they die? Or what happens when they just simply make a mistake that you disagree with? For sometimes your foundation is your religion. It's that maybe a code of ethics, religion or ethics, that I will do this and I will do this, and you have a certain set of rules because of your religion or because of your ethical behavior that is there. And that can be better because it is more significant than you are. It's a higher sense of purpose and a higher sense of calling. Well, for me, my mentor or my foundation is the person of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm only going to discuss this just for a couple of minutes, but let me tell you why. For me, I have found that I will be 61 years old in 2 weeks. On August the 27th, I'll be 61. I have been a leader for over 40 years. I've been a professor, and I have been an educator, and I have been a speaker in different things. I have found that, to me, my most important mentor has been Jesus Christ, and this is why he is that foundation to me. Because, first of all, Jesus of Nazareth possessed convictions. He was an individual that knew exactly what he was going to do, and even though he was going to be rejected, and he was rejected by everyone, even his family rejected him at times. But he was rejected, he still had a sense of conviction. He knew exactly what he was going to do and why he was going to live a certain life, even if to the point that his conviction caused him to be tortured, or caused him to be whipped, and caused him to be scourged and hung on a cross. He was a person of companions. He is known for the 12 disciples. One of them left, who deserted him. Many of them actually deserted him. They denied him. But he had 12 men that he spent his time with. You read that throughout the writings in the Bible of him spending time, especially with Peter, James, and John, the three. He had people that came alongside of him whenever he was walking upon this earth, and he was committed to companions. It's interesting. He even made a statement one time. He says, "No greater love is this than a man will lay down his life for his friends." You hear that? That there's no greater love than that a man would lay down his life for his friends. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He died for his friends, but he actually died for me and died for you as well because of the sense of companions. Next one was the sense of courage, that he possessed courage in life. He was courageous until they took him to the cross. He actually knew that what was going to happen to himself, being nailed to the cross to be crucified over 2,000 years ago. But he had the courage to do so. It's interesting, not only did he mention that he loved his friends, but it even says that he loved us so much that he actually loved his enemies. And that relates to the last part, the aspect of compassion. The most famous verse in the Bible is John 3:16. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Now, Jesus, you may think, well, wait a second, Dr. Weakley. I thought you were talking about how that religion is a foundation. When I talk about Jesus Christ, I'm not talking about a religion. I'm talking about a relationship, because Jesus wants a relationship with me. He wants a relationship with everyone if we will turn to him and believe what he has done on the cross for us, dying for our sin. See, Jesus never lost sight of his objective. And a servant leader never loses sight of their objective. Jesus knew exactly where he was going, and in the same way, servant leaders know exactly what the objective is. And Jesus's objective was that we would each be able to have a relationship with him because he died for us on the cross, and so we can have a relationship for him if we just simply believe in him. Now, that's my foundation. You do not have to believe that to be in this class. You do not have to believe this to believe in servant leadership. But I do say this, you do have to put something here. You're going to have to put something in this foundation. It may be your mentor, it may be yourself, it may be your organization, it may be your religion, it may be your family. It's going to be something, but each person is going to have to take the time and the energy to put something there in that foundation of their life. Now, the last question I want to ask you is this. We're almost done in class, is which of the 4 pillars is your strength and which of the 4 pillars is your weakness? So which of the 4 pillars is your strength and which of the 4 pillars is your weakness? Look back there a second. The 4 pillars were conviction, companionship, courage, and compassion. Conviction, companionship, courage, and compassion. Which one is your strength and which one is your weakness? Take a minute. Does anyone like to share verbally which one is your strength and which one is your weakness? So just choose either one, your strength or the weakness.
We have 10 more minutes to go to discuss, you know.
Oh, okay, 10 more minutes, okay.
Yeah.
Which one is your strength and which one is your weakness? Anyone like to share?
Or
write it in the chat?
shall I make a sort of a breakout session, or they can discuss?
Yes, that would be good. Why don't you do that and we'll just make a short one, like maybe just maybe a 5-minute breakout session of Bar Sensor. That would be good. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.